Imagine being humiliated at work in front of everyone, until suddenly someone unexpected stands up to defend you. What seemed like another difficult night for a humble waitress turns into a surprising turn of events that changed her life forever. Scarlett was a 23-year-old young woman who, despite the difficult circumstances of her life, never stopped showing a smile. She worked as a waitress in an upscale restaurant known for hosting elite clientele in the city. Every day, Scarlett would wake up early, prepare breakfast for her mother, Edith, and head out to face her long workday. Although the restaurant was luxurious, frequented by important and wealthy figures, Scarlett's life was anything but glamorous. The small house where she lived was in a modest neighborhood, far from the city's affluent areas. The place was always tidy, but showed signs of wear: a leaky roof, faded walls, and old furniture. Her mother, Edith, had been ill for a few years, weakened by a chronic condition that required constant medical care. The illness confined Edith to the house, while Scarlett was solely responsible for supporting both of them. Scarlett's routine was exhausting. Her days began before dawn and ended late at night. Even so, she kept her spirits strong. On the way to the restaurant, Scarlett would often look at the city's skyscrapers with a mix of admiration and hope. She knew her life was tough, but she dreamed of one day changing things. Not just for herself, but especially for her mother, who had sacrificed so much to provide her with a decent life. The restaurant where she worked, Blue Ivy, was one of the most expensive in the city. Scarlett had landed the job after months of searching, and although the pay was low for the cost of living she faced, it was enough to cover basic expenses and buy Edith's medication. However, the work environment was hostile. Most of the customers didn't care about the staff and frequently treated the waiters as invisible or worse, inferior. Scarlett, however, had a unique way of dealing with these situations. She always believed that her dignity came from within and that no one could take it from her, no matter how cruel the treatment she received. Even so, this conviction was challenged daily. Her co-workers saw her as a strong person, someone who never complained and always took on the toughest tasks without hesitation. But what few knew was that Scarlett carried an enormous emotional burden inside. One of Scarlett's constant concerns was her mother's health. Edith had been a very active woman in her youth, but over time the illness began to consume her strength. Seeing her mother so fragile and dependent was one of Scarlett's greatest pains, but also her main motivation to keep fighting. The cost of medical treatments was high, and Scarlett was always trying to balance expenses to ensure Edith received the best care possible, even with the little she earned. In addition to financial pressures, there was physical exhaustion. Standing all day carrying heavy trays, meeting demanding customers' expectations, and dealing with the stress of a chaotic environment left Scarlett drained. However, what wore her down the most was the way she was treated. The restaurant was frequented by businessmen, celebrities, and wealthy people who, for the most part, barely looked at her. When they did, it was only to give orders or criticize a small mistake. Despite this, Scarlett held on to hope. She had a dream, to one day open her own restaurant. To many, this seemed impossible, a fantasy out of reach for someone in her position. However, Scarlett believed that with hard work and perseverance, she could transform her life. It was this dream that helped her endure the humiliations and fatigue, always keeping her head held high. Sometimes Scarlett wondered what the lives of the people she served in the restaurant were like. To them, everything seemed easy. They ordered expensive dishes without even glancing at the prices on the menu, talked about luxury trips and purchases as if they were trivial. Scarlett didn't envy these people, but she couldn't help thinking about how distant and unattainable their world seemed. One day, as she walked to the restaurant, Scarlett stopped in front of a luxury store window. She saw herself reflected in the glass, wearing her simple uniform and with a tired expression. Behind her reflection were expensive jewelry and clothes that she could never afford. Scarlett sighed and kept walking, reminding herself that she had to stay strong, as her mother depended on her. Upon arriving at Blue Ivy, Scarlett prepared for another long shift. She knew that, like every night, she would have to deal with demanding and often rude customers. But something inside her always made her believe that somehow her life would change. She just didn't know that this change was closer than she imagined. As she arranged the tables and reviewed the day's menu, Scarlett looked around and wondered if she would ever be seen as more than just a waitress. Deep down, she knew her worth wasn't determined by how others saw her, but by her inner strength. Still, a small part of her longed for recognition, for someone to see her beyond the uniform, beyond the image of a poor young woman struggling to survive. And so another night began. Scarlett, as always, was ready to face the challenges that lay ahead, unaware that this particular night would mark the beginning of a turning point in her life, something she could never have predicted. The Blue Ivy restaurant was especially busy that night. Almost all the tables were occupied, and the atmosphere was one of sophistication and opulence typical of that place. Scarlett, as always, was focused on her work, trying to ignore the accumulated fatigue and the weight of her worries. However, something felt different in the air that night. She had an inexplicable nervousness, as if something important was about to happen. As she moved quickly between the tables, balancing heavy trays, Scarlett noticed a particular group of customers entering. There were 5 of them, all well-dressed, clearly part of the city's elite. Their laughter was loud and carefree, and the way they looked around the restaurant conveyed a confidence typical of those used to being the center of attention. Among them, the most imposing figure seemed to be Percival, a man in his 40s with carefully groomed hair and an air of arrogance. As soon as Scarlett was assigned to serve them, she already knew that the night would not be easy. Groups like that, made up of rich and bored people, often sought amusement at the expense of the restaurant staff. She took a deep breath and tried to mentally prepare for what was to come as she approached the table to take their orders. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Blue Ivy. What can I get for you today?" Scarlett asked with her best professional smile, even knowing that deep down, she would likely be ignored. Percival gave her a disdainful look, as if analyzing every detail of her appearance, looking for flaws. Instead of answering directly, he whispered something to the others, and they began to laugh, completely disregarding Scarlett's presence. She tried not to show that she had noticed their behavior, but the embarrassment was already creeping into her body. Still, she stood firm. After a few seconds of laughter, Percival finally spoke. "We want the best wine in the house. You know which one that is, don't you?" he asked with a tone that bordered on mockery. Scarlett, already used to demanding requests, quickly confirmed. "Yes, sir. We have Chateau Margaux, a 1996 vintage, considered the finest wine on our menu." Percival pretended to be interested, but it was clear that he didn't really care about the wine. The group agreed on the choice, and Scarlett went to arrange the order, feeling their eyes still on her, as if evaluating her every move. While waiting for the sommelier to prepare the wine, Scarlett couldn't help but wonder why certain customers took so much pleasure in belittling others. To her, it was incomprehensible behavior, though common in her daily life at Blue Ivy. When she returned to the table with the wine, Percival's group was engrossed in a conversation about investments and business deals that Scarlett could barely understand. Once again, she was treated as if she were invisible. As she served the wine, Percival held his glass and looked at her with a smile that seemed more cruel than kind. "Don't let it spill, huh?" he said, with a sarcastic chuckle. The others laughed along, and Scarlett, feeling her cheeks burn with embarrassment, did her best to keep her hands steady as she poured. The next few minutes were filled with veiled insults and cutting remarks. Percival and his group made a point of highlighting every small mistake, no matter how insignificant. When Scarlett accidentally let a drop of wine spill onto the table, the group erupted in laughter. And Percival, loud enough for other diners to hear, said maybe she should go back to school to learn how to serve properly. His words cut like a knife. Scarlett kept her head down, trying to mask her shame. Even so, she took a deep breath and continued to serve the rest of the orders with as much professionalism as possible. But the atmosphere around her was becoming more and more suffocating. It was as if the group was playing a cruel game, where their fun came from testing the limits of her patience and dignity. Midway through the night, as Scarlett brought the main courses to the table, Percival decided to take the humiliation to the next level. He deliberately knocked his glass of wine onto the floor, causing it to shatter and the liquid to spread. The loud sound made everyone around turn to look at the table, and Scarlett immediately bent down to clean the mess, trying to stay calm. "Oh, what a disaster," Percival exclaimed, feigning concern as he laughed. "Waitress, be a dear and clean this up." And make it quick. The group's laughter was loud and cruel, as if someone else's suffering was the highlight of their night. Scarlett, swallowing her anger and humiliation, crouched down to clean up the shards of glass and the spilled wine. Her hands trembled, not out of fear, but from the frustration of being treated that way. She could feel the tears threatening to fall, but she couldn't let them see her break down. That was what they wanted, to break her, to humiliate her until she lost her composure. But Scarlett wasn't going to give in that easily. As she knelt on the floor, picking up the broken pieces, Percival continued his taunts. You know, I always thought this kind of job was perfect for people like you. Simple. Doesn't take much. Just bow your head and do what you're told. More laughter echoed around the table. Scarlett bit her lip, swallowing the urge to respond. The last thing she wanted was to lose her job. She needed that paycheck, small as it was, to support her sick mother. For a brief moment, Scarlett wondered why no one from the restaurant staff was intervening. None of her colleagues, no manager seemed willing to help her, as if this were a common scene, something accepted as part of the daily life at that place. But although she had grown accustomed to small humiliations, that night was particularly difficult. Percival's words echoed in her head like a constant reminder, eating away at her pride and dignity. When she finally finished cleaning the floor, Scarlett stood up, her hands still trembling, and tried to regain her posture. She knew that all eyes around her were on her, waiting for some kind of reaction. But instead of exploding or crying, she simply walked away from the table, her head held high. Her heart was broken, but her determination to keep resisting was stronger. The restaurant returned to its usual murmur, but inside Scarlett, something had changed. She felt her patience wearing thin, and the pain of that humiliation still echoed deep within her. Yet she had no idea that someone had been watching everything closely, someone who wasn't willing to let that injustice go unnoticed. Scarlett had endured so much throughout the night that she could barely process what had happened. As she left Percival's table, she headed to the kitchen, where she took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Every fiber of her body was exhausted, not just from the physical fatigue, but from the emotional toll of being humiliated over and over again. Tears formed in her eyes, but Scarlett knew she couldn't allow herself to cry right then, in the middle of her shift. She needed to stay strong, as she always did. What Scarlett didn't know was that someone had been closely watching the entire scene. Sitting at a discreet table in the corner of the restaurant was Heath Umpahi, a man in his mid-30s with a calm demeanor and a keen, observant look. Heath wasn't just an ordinary customer. Despite his simple appearance, he was a discreet millionaire and the owner of one of the largest restaurant chains in the region, including Blue Ivy. He liked to visit his establishments anonymously, without making a fuss, to better understand the day-to-day operations and observe the behavior of both employees and customers. That night, he hadn't intended to interfere, only to observe, but after witnessing Scarlett's humiliation, he felt compelled to act. Heath was a man who valued respect above all else. He believed that the true measure of a person was in how they treated others, especially those in more humble positions. Seeing Scarlett repeatedly humiliated reminded him of his own beginnings. Before achieving success, Heath had also faced challenges and been underestimated many times. He knew what it was like to be treated with disdain, and he couldn't just stand by and watch that happen. When Scarlett returned to the dining area, trying to hold her head high despite the tears she had held back, Heath observed the group of Percival continuing their provocations as if nothing had happened. They ordered more wine and made jokes about how the previous waitress should have been replaced by someone more competent. Heath clenched his fists under the table, his frustration growing with each cruel comment. Determined to intervene, Heath stood up and walked toward Percival's table. The atmosphere in the restaurant changed immediately when he approached. Scarlett, who was serving another table nearby, noticed his movement from the corner of her eye, but didn't expect what was about to happen. Heath, standing tall and with a serious expression, stopped in front of Percival's table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. Everyone at the table stopped laughing immediately and looked at him, not understanding what was going on. Percival, in particular, seemed surprised and slightly irritated by the interruption. "There's something I need to say." Percival frowned, sizing Heath up as if he were just another ordinary customer. "Can I help you with something?" You seem to be in the wrong place." Heath ignored the sarcastic tone and continued, "Actually, I'm in the right place, and you are the ones on the wrong path, treating an employee with such a lack of respect." The group was silent for a moment, unable to believe that someone was publicly challenging them. Percival gave a disdainful smile as if finding the situation ridiculous. "And who do you think you are to tell us how to behave? Are you defending the waitress? That's pathetic." Heath, however, remained calm. "My name is Heath, and yes, I'm defending Scarlett, because, besides being a human being deserving of respect, she works here with more dignity than any of you are showing." The confused looks around the table quickly turned to shock. It wasn't common for anyone to stand up to people like Percival and his group, especially in a restaurant of that caliber. Scarlett, who was watching the scene from afar, stood frozen. She had never seen anyone, especially a customer, take her side so openly and bravely. Her heart raced, torn between surprise and gratitude. Percival tried to maintain control of the situation, but it was clear he was starting to feel threatened. "Okay, you made your speech. Now please leave us alone. We don't need a moral lesson from someone like you." That's when Heath decided to reveal his true identity. "I think you do need a lesson. And before I continue, let me clarify something. I'm the owner of Blue Ivy and several other restaurants across the state, and I personally ensure that my establishments are places where people, regardless of their position, are treated with respect. So if you don't know how to behave in a place like this, the door is right there." The shock on Percival and his group's faces was palpable. The arrogance from earlier had completely disappeared. They had no idea they were facing the owner of the restaurant. Percival tried to say something, but the words caught in his throat. The humiliation was now on their side. Heath turned to Scarlett, who was still paralyzed with surprise. "You don't deserve to be treated like that, Scarlett, and I won't allow it to happen in my restaurant. You have my respect, and anyone who doesn't understand that has no place here." Scarlett felt a lump form in her throat. Heath's words, his firm stance, and the fact that he had stood up for her so publicly and courageously touched her deeply. She had never expected someone like him, especially the restaurant owner, to defend her in such a bold and public way. Heath looked back at Percival and his group, now visibly uncomfortable. "I think I've made myself clear. If you don't know how to treat people, maybe you should find somewhere else to dine." With no way to respond, Percival and the other members of the group began to stand up, humiliated and speechless. They knew they had lost. As they left, Heath turned to Scarlett one last time with an encouraging smile. "You did your job well. Don't ever let anyone make you think otherwise." Scarlett stood completely frozen, still processing what had just happened. It was as if time had slowed down, and she couldn't comprehend the sequence of events she had just witnessed. What she feared most, being humiliated in front of the entire restaurant, had indeed happened. But what she never imagined was that someone, especially the restaurant's owner, would stand up for her so publicly and courageously. Heath's imposing presence, defending her with such conviction, was something she had never expected to see in her life. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, her heart beating erratically. Scarlett felt a mix of emotions: relief, surprise, gratitude, and a deep sense of vulnerability. It was as if, for a brief moment, all the eyes in the restaurant were on her, not with disdain as earlier, but with respect. The same respect that Heath had demanded for her. Scarlett felt a wave of warmth rise to her face, and her racing heart seemed to pound even harder. The humiliation of having been treated like a servant by Percival was still fresh, and the emotional weight of his offensive words lingered in her mind. But now something had shifted. For the first time, someone had made her feel valued, not because of her position or job, but because of her worth as a person. Heath had defended her dignity in a way Scarlett never thought possible. She tried to keep herself together, though the tears threatened to fall. For a woman who had spent most of her life controlling her emotions, swallowing her feelings, and holding back tears in difficult situations, this was a moment of release, but also one of fragility. Scarlett had become so used to being strong that the idea of showing her emotions in public scared her. She glanced at Heath, who had now returned to his table, and wondered how a man like him, a millionaire, powerful and influential, could care so much about a humble waitress. Scarlett took a step back, trying to escape the attention. She wanted to flee, to leave the dining room and cry in peace, far from all the curious stares. But something inside her kept her from moving. It was as if, in that moment, she was facing an internal battle between her old life, full of resignation and compliance, and the possibility of something new, a chance to be seen differently. As her coworkers looked at her with a mixture of surprise and empathy, Scarlett finally found the strength to move. She headed to the back of the restaurant, where she could have a moment to breathe and process everything that had happened. Once inside the small employee break room, she closed the door and slid down to the floor, letting the exhaustion hit her like a tidal wave. The tears she had been holding back finally began to fall. The reality of her life had always been a constant fight, fighting against adversity, against exhaustion, against the pain of seeing her mother, Edith, deteriorate day by day. Scarlett had learned to accept suffering as part of life, to endure humiliations without reacting because she knew she needed that job to support her mother and pay the medical bills. But Heath, with one single gesture, had changed everything. He had shown her that her dignity was worth more than any job, that she deserved respect regardless of her situation. As the tears streamed down her face, Scarlett recalled every difficult moment she had faced. The countless times customers had made cruel comments, the condescending looks, the jokes at her expense. All of it had been stifled within her. She swallowed the pain and smiled because she believed she had no other choice. But now something had broken inside her. It was as if Heath had sparked a flame within her, something that had been dormant for a long time. The desire to be seen, to be recognized for who she truly was. Scarlett replayed Heath's words in her mind. "You don't deserve to be treated like that, and I won't allow it to happen in my restaurant." Those words were like a balm to her emotional wounds, a reminder that her humanity couldn't be erased by insults or humiliation. Heath had stood up for her, and at that moment, Scarlett felt she wasn't alone in her struggle. As she calmed down, the door to the break room opened gently. Alana, a co-worker, and one of the few people Scarlett considered a friend at the restaurant, entered quietly. Alana had watched everything from a distance and knew that Scarlett needed support. Without saying anything, she sat down next to Scarlett on the floor. With a kind gesture, Alana put her arm around Scarlett's shoulders, offering silent comfort. Scarlett looked at Alana, and the two exchanged a look of mutual understanding. "I can't believe what just happened out there," Scarlett said, her voice shaky with emotion. "He defended me, in front of everyone." Alana smiled slightly. "You deserved it. You've deserved it for a long time, Scarlett. Someone finally saw who you really are." Those words made Scarlett think about how many times she had felt invisible. All her hard work, all her effort to care for her mother, all the nights she spent balancing her own dignity. It all seemed so distant from how people perceived her. But Heath, a man who barely knew her, had seen something no one else had. Scarlett wiped her tears and took a deep breath, trying to pull herself together. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. Something inside her had changed that night. She wasn't just the waitress who silently accepted humiliation anymore. Heath's intervention had made her realize that her life didn't have to be like that she could aspire to something more, something bigger than simply surviving. After a few minutes of silence, Scarlett finally stood up. Alana also stood by her side, ready to give her the support she needed. "Are you okay?" Alana asked gently. Scarlett nodded, though she still felt the weight of the recent emotions. "I'm okay. I think I'm okay. I need to get back out there." She knew she had to face the dining room again, but now something was different. The feeling of humiliation that had haunted her throughout the night had been replaced by a new strength. Heath had planted a seed of courage in Scarlett, one she knew she would need to nurture from that moment on. When she finally returned to the dining room, her gaze still firm and her body weary, Scarlett felt that, although the internal battle was far from over, she was no longer as alone. Something had shifted inside her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt that maybe there was more for her than a life of silent humiliations. She scanned the restaurant, now quieter after Percival's group had left, and saw Heath still sitting at his table. He looked up and saw her enter. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Scarlett felt a deep wave of gratitude. Heath hadn't said anything, but in his gaze, Scarlett found the recognition she had been longing for. He knew something had changed within her, and she knew that from now on, her life would never be the same. As Scarlett returned to the dining area, still processing the events of the night, she noticed that the atmosphere around her had changed. The emotional weight of Percival's insults and his group's mockery still lingered, but the humiliation no longer had the same devastating impact as before. Something inside her had strengthened, and she knew it was due to Heath's unexpected intervention. The life she knew until then, marked by resignation and survival, now seemed to open a new door. Scarlett continued her shift with a renewed sense of purpose. Her colleagues looked at her with admiration, something she had never experienced before. She noticed the whispers among the customers, who were talking about the scene of humiliation, and most of all, about how Heath had stood up for her. In her mind, the image of him confronting Percival was still fresh. But as she focused on finishing her tasks, Scarlett began to wonder, why would he do that for her? What did he see in her that motivated him to act so firmly and publicly? The night continued until the restaurant's closing, and Scarlett was preparing to leave when she sensed a presence beside her. It was Heath. He was more casual now, without the same air of authority he had shown earlier. But his gaze still carried the same intensity, the same genuine concern for what had happened. Scarlett felt a sudden nervousness. She never imagined she would have a direct conversation with him, let alone after what had happened that night. "Scarlett," he began, his voice calm and firm, "I need to talk to you before you leave." She stopped and turned to him, unsure of what to expect. Her heart started racing again, but not out of fear or insecurity like before. This time it was anticipation. Heath gestured toward an empty table in the corner of the restaurant, and Scarlett agreed, following him there. As they sat down, the initial silence was only broken by the sound of a few staff members still cleaning the dining area. "I wanted to apologize for what you had to go through tonight," Heath said, looking her directly in the eyes. "No one should be treated that way, especially someone who works as hard as you do." Scarlett didn't know how to respond. For a moment, she remained silent, trying to process the magnitude of that moment. She had learned to handle adversity on her own, without expecting anyone to step in or offer help. But now, there was Heath, the owner of the restaurant, apologizing for something he hadn't even caused. "Thank you," Scarlett finally said, her voice soft and hesitant. I, I don't know what to say. No one has ever stood up for me like that before." Heath nodded slightly. "I saw how you were treated, and seeing that reminded me of many things I went through when I was younger." He paused as if carefully choosing his next words. "I didn't start out as the owner of a restaurant chain. In fact, I worked in many places, in roles very similar to yours. I know what it's like to be underestimated, disrespected. I know how cruel people can be when they think you're beneath them." Scarlett felt a wave of empathy as she heard Heath's words. She had never imagined that someone as successful as him could have gone through something similar to what she faced every day. But at the same time, she felt a slight discomfort. A part of her still wondered if he was offering his support out of pity, and she didn't want to be seen as a victim. "I'm used to this," Scarlett responded, looking down at her hands on the table. "It's what I do every day, just to keep paying the bills, to help my mother. I need this job, and I can't afford to react, even when things get tough." Heath studied her face, clearly moved by the sincerity in Scarlett's words. "I understand your situation, Scarlett, and that's why I want to offer you something more. Something that could completely change your life, if you're willing to accept it." Scarlett looked at him, not knowing what he meant. She felt a slight tension in the air, a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. Heath continued, "I've been watching you work here, even before tonight. You are dedicated, resilient, and above all, you have a sense of dignity that is rare to find. That's rare, and it's exactly the kind of person I look for." Scarlett blinked, still confused. "Look for what?" Heath smiled slightly. "I want to offer you an opportunity to grow. I want you to work in one of my luxury restaurants, but not as a waitress. I want you to go through a full training program to learn the business from the inside. I'm sure you have what it takes to rise in your career, to become something more, and I want to help you get there." Scarlett could hardly believe what she was hearing. What Heath was saying was something she had never dreamed of hearing, at least not for herself. The idea of leaving the role of waitress and having the chance to grow in a luxury restaurant seemed simply unbelievable. But doubt soon crept in. "Why me? There are so many more qualified, more experienced people." Heath gently interrupted. "It's not about experience. I can teach anyone the technical skills needed. What I can't teach is the determination, the character, the courage you showed tonight. You already have that, and that's what makes the difference." Heath's words echoed inside her, stirring something deep within. Scarlett, who had always believed that the world was ruthless and that only the most privileged could rise, was now faced with an opportunity she never thought possible. Her mind began to race with questions. And her mother? How would she take care of Edith if she accepted an offer that required more of her time and attention? As if reading her thoughts, Heath continued, "I know your mother depends on you, and I want you to know that I'll do everything I can to help with that part as well. I know how important she is to you, and I don't want that to be an obstacle. We can make sure she gets the care she needs while you dedicate yourself to growing." Scarlett felt tears beginning to form again. Everything seemed surreal. Not only was Heath offering her a career opportunity, but he was also showing genuine care for her personal situation. It was more than she could ever have hoped for, but there was still a part of her that hesitated. Her whole life, Scarlett had learned to be cautious, not to expect big changes, to accept that things would hardly improve in any significant way. But now that offer was in front of her, and the possibility of something bigger and better seemed within her reach. I, I don't know what to say," Scarlett murmured, still trying to process the impact of Heath's words. "This is all so much more than I could have imagined." Heath leaned forward slightly, looking her in the eyes with seriousness. "The only thing you need to say is whether or not you want this opportunity, Scarlett. The rest we'll figure out together." Scarlett took a deep breath. In her mind, flashes of everything she had lived through quickly passed by. The struggles, the humiliations, the sleepless nights thinking about how to pay the bills and take care of her mother. And now she was faced with a choice that could change everything. And with her heart racing, she made a decision. "Yes," Scarlett replied, her voice trembling slightly, but filled with determination. "I accept." Heath smiled, satisfied. "Then, Scarlett, welcome to the next chapter of your life." The next day brought an entirely new feeling for Scarlett. The decision she made the night before still felt surreal, but it was becoming more and more real as time passed. After accepting Heath's offer, her mind was spinning, torn between excitement and fear. But above all, one thing was clear. Her life was about to change dramatically, and this time for the better. That morning, Scarlett woke up early as usual, but with a lighter heart. As she prepared breakfast for her mother, Edith, she was still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Heath, the owner of a luxury restaurant chain, had seen her in a way no one else had ever seen her. He didn't just recognize her hard work and dignity, but he believed she could achieve more, be more. That offer wasn't just a job opportunity, but a chance for personal, professional, and emotional transformation. Scarlett knew that the first challenge would be to tell her mother. Edith had always been her biggest supporter and inspiration, even in the hardest of times. Now she was the person Scarlett most wanted to share this new phase of her life with. However, she also feared how Edith would react to the changes. Her mother was getting more and more frail, and Scarlett knew that without her around every day, life could become even more difficult for both of them. As she entered Edith's room with the breakfast tray, Scarlett approached her slowly, feeling a slight nervousness. Her mother looked at her with affection, as she always did, but there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes, as if she could sense that something had changed. "Good morning, dear," Edith said, her voice weak but filled with love. "You look different today. Did something happen?" Scarlett smiled, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Mom, I need to tell you something." With care, Scarlett explained everything that had happened the night before, from the humiliation she had suffered to Heath's incredible intervention. As she spoke, she saw her mother's eyes widen with surprise, followed by a proud smile that, despite her fatigue, lit up her face. When Scarlett reached the part where she accepted Heath's offer, Edith squeezed her hand tightly. "Scarlett, my dear, that's wonderful," Edith said, her eyes filled with tears. "You deserve this. You deserve every bit of this opportunity." "But Mom, what about you? How will I take care of you? I really want to take this chance, but I can't leave you here alone." Edith smiled gently, still holding Scarlett's hand. "You've taken care of me for so long, Scarlett. Now it's my turn to watch you flourish. We'll find a way. Don't worry. I'll be fine." Scarlett felt the tears welling up in her eyes again. Everything felt so surreal. Not only was Heath offering her a career opportunity, but he was also showing genuine concern for her personal situation. It was more than she could have ever hoped for. But still, there was a part of her that hesitated. She had learned all her life to be cautious, not to expect big changes, and to accept that things wouldn't improve much. But now that offer was in front of her, and the possibility of something greater, something better, was within her reach. Over the following days, Heath fulfilled his promise. He arranged for Scarlett to start training at one of his most prestigious restaurants, known for its excellence in service and high-end cuisine. Scarlett would be trained in every department, from team management to kitchen operations and financial administration. The goal was to mold her into a high-level manager, someone who could eventually run one of his luxury restaurants. Scarlett's first day at the new establishment was marked by nervousness, but also a new sense of excitement she had never experienced before. As she entered the restaurant, with its elegant decor and the aroma of fine dishes filling the air, Scarlett realized that she was stepping into a new world. The fear of not being adequate or not living up to expectations was still there, but Heath's words echoed in her mind. He believed in her. Now she needed to believe in herself too. Heath introduced her to the staff and the restaurant's head manager, Megan, who would be responsible for her training. Megan was an experienced and demanding woman, but upon meeting Scarlett, she made it clear that she was there to help her grow. Megan had heard about how Scarlett had earned Heath's respect, and she was eager to work with her. Scarlett knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but she felt supported in a way she never had before. The first few days of training were intense. Scarlett learned the intricacies of running a restaurant, from handling suppliers to managing the staff during peak hours. Gradually, she became more comfortable with the processes and systems, discovering a new passion for leadership and creating a harmonious, efficient working environment. Scarlett realized that being a manager wasn't just about giving orders, but about understanding each employee's needs and making the restaurant function like a well-tuned machine. As Scarlett focused on this new challenge, Heath kept a close eye on her progress. They met occasionally to discuss her experiences and any doubts she had. During one of these meetings, Heath surprised her by sharing a bit more of his own story. "I started as a dishwasher," Heath said with a smile. "No one really paid attention to me back then, but I always believed that if I worked hard enough, I could be more. Slowly, I proved that. And I see the same in you, Scarlett. You have that spark. It doesn't matter where you start. It's what you do with the opportunities that will take you where you want to go." Heath's words solidified Scarlett's belief that she was on the right path. Her life, which had once been defined by quiet struggles and humiliation, was now becoming a journey of growth and resilience. Every day of training felt like a personal victory, and Scarlett realized that it wasn't just about acquiring technical skills. It was about transforming into the person she had always known she could be, even if life had never given her the chance before. As the months passed, Scarlett began to stand out more and more. She faced tough challenges, made complex decisions, and above all, learned to trust herself. Megan, always demanding, became a crucial mentor, and Heath continued to be a source of inspiration. Scarlett finally felt that, for the first time, she had control over her own destiny. One quiet afternoon, Heath called Scarlett into his office for a private meeting. When she arrived, Heath's smile hinted that something big was about to happen. "Scarlett," Heath began, "I've been following your progress over the past few months, and I have to say, you've exceeded all my expectations. not only in terms of skills, but as a leader, someone your peers respect and trust. That's why I'm ready to offer you something we discussed back at the start of this journey. Scarlett looked at him, her heart racing, unsure of what was coming next. I want to appoint you as the manager of one of my restaurants. Are you ready for that responsibility? Scarlett was speechless. It was a moment she had never thought possible. After everything she had endured, the humiliations, the silent struggles, now she was being recognized in a way she had never dared to dream. Yes, Scarlett replied, her voice firm, though her emotions threatened to spill over. I'm ready. Scarlett was no longer the waitress who silently endured insults. She was now a confident, capable woman, ready to lead. Her new journey was just beginning, and she knew that with the support of people like Heath, Megan, and most importantly her mother, there was no limit to what she could achieve. Did you like this exciting story? So leave your like and share with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos full of twists and turns and life lessons. We have many more incredible stories waiting for you. Click here to watch the next video and keep getting excited with us.